It's Vijay, the brother from the ancient mother. You're watching another installment of the Headspace, Africa's most poignant hip-hop channel, where we uncover, discover, profile, talk about, celebrate this beautiful culture of hip-hop as it manifests itself in the motherland, Africa. What up to you? If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to us if you're into this kind of content. Now, the review that I am going to do is by possibly one of the most legendary hip-hop crews in the country of South Africa. I'm talking about none other than Skwatta Kamp. Don't call it a comeback. I guess they are bringing to light their legacy to a generation which probably doesn't really get how significant Skwatta is. They tend to fall along the margins because, truth be told, they're part of an era where a lot of rappers were finding themselves stylistically. Therefore, when you compare them to the standard today, they kind of feel mediocre. They feel like they were trying to rap and not really executing it to the most. But I think that is a very unfair description and conclusion that can be reached if what you're going to do is compare something which was literally born in the 2000s, early 2000s, what many would consider, the 2005 to 8 era, the golden era of SA rap, which, mind you, wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a Skwatta Kamp to begin with. Their album was actually the gateway to most South Africans really realizing that hip-hop can look, feel, and be understood as a South African phenomenon, as an African phenomenon. I mean, for those who were there when the video for Umoya dropped, as shabby as it looks today when you watch it on YouTube, it really gave us the momentum of translating that same aggression, that same rebellious tone, that very same need to empower ourselves to this art form of rap in a way that felt so familiar to us. I remember Nemza's verse kicking the door and really making us all sing along. Talking about singing along, Relo really bringing a kind of necessary balance to the often hyper-aggressive angle of Skwatta Kamp. And as history goes, they would become South Africa's most sensational, probably most successful rap group. And as a result, they are legends in their right, naturally so. They built a momentum. They established a foundation. They were brave enough to take it into different directions. They were observant and they were dedicated enough to kind of go from just youths who love rap as what rap was manifesting itself as in America, to really thinking about the subsequent political importance of translating this rap in a way what South Africans could really relate to. From going to changing their names into things which sounded a little bit like a throwback to that science complex rap age, to really going into ekasi and having this thoughtful approach at targeting the townships as the locus of narrative telling as we do hip-hop in South Africa. I mean, which nothing else makes sense. If you're going to tell the stories of the ghetto, how can you do that in a language that your ghetto doesn't speak? And as a result, this is why Skwatta became Skwatta. They translated the language of Mzansi into a format which was very familiar to the rugged sound of hip-hop, but also beautifully representational of what the country was going through. Now, their catalog is rich and it goes through Skwatta campaign, which was kind of like the birth pains of what would be done through Cut and Join, and of course with Kuku Function kind of being the commercial acclaimed success, going into Washu Kuku, an extension of this rugged sound, going into clubby places, and back on campus, kind of them trying to navigate this transition of hip-hop changing into something a little bit more crunk-esque and how they would find themselves in this time. Then we have Fair and Square, which, to be fair and square, was awful. It was Skwatta Kamp struggling to find their tone in an industry that it felt they didn't belong. And I think this was the momentum that kind of allowed them to dissipate in different places to find themselves and mature. And of course, we lost very significant members of the group. Rest in peace to Flaba, whose life was tragically lost, not only to his family but to South Africa, because he managed to become probably the most successful in taking their individual character and really emboldening it into the country in ways which were lovable. And I think when we look back at the career of Flaba, it's not only a testament to Skwatta Kamp's legacy, but it's also an example of how the group was successful because they knew how to feed into the strength of each individual. And you felt a Skwatta Kamp song because the members didn't get lost in the haze of group work. Everybody had their own individual niche, pun intended, that they really kind of pushed to the fore, which made it impressive to listen to. Now their album, if you've been counting as I have been narrating the catalog, reaches into the 7th, and this is why they named this one 7. It feels like a moment which, to be honest with you, was rushed, forced, and done in ways which didn't consider what built the legacy to begin with. First, the sound that Skwatta Kamp sculpted was very much one which lended itself more to the streets than to the clubs. It was this kind of sound which was very hyper-masculine, very much a throwback into boom bap, South Africanized in ways which could kind of ring relatable to the sound which was heavy back then, which was Kwaito. Remember, the late 90s to the early 2000s were a very hyper-masculine time in music in general. Men dominated the climate of how music felt, and I think if you're looking at the quote-unquote genre of rap, this was a time where being rough, rugged, and raw was the thing, and this was appreciated by everybody, including the ladies. And I think Skwatta's style kind of fits into the format of this rugged, eccentric play on energy. It's always hyper, it's always driven to the maximum, and I think if we look at all of their most successful songs, it's turn it up a notch so that we can blare the speaker type music, and it's done in a way that's endearingly abrasive, with loud bambing, blaring bass lines, and a sound which is more boom bap and Kwaito influence to kind of create this hybridized idea of a South African boom bap. So as a result, even the clap song in its appeal to the kind of dance floor was still very much a joint which could easily fit into the mold of a cypher. It was Shai Zanda, Sai Zanda, but it was done in a way that was, it was really filled with the energy of the kind of boom bap influence, which was kind of polished and made a little sparkly. But to be honest with you, Skwatta Kamp is very much a classical rap group that does up the classical rap sound. And when I talk about classical rap sound, it's that sample driven drum, bass, boom bap influenced kind of sound, even in its aspirations to make people dance. Therefore, when you look at their evolution, the more they try to go outside of this place, the more they failed at really executing what makes them work as a group. Because even the way the rappers rap, they're all very into the assertive tone. Even the most kind of low register, like Nish, rest in peace to him too, were really in this pocket of rapping in your face type lyrics. Slicker tended to be the more reflective one, but because his raps were spaced in between and done in a very minimalist way, even his attitude was also driven in that same vein of pushing the energy to the max. So when they try to do something which plays outside of the zone of their established sound, it falls flat because a lot of the members don't have the capacity to kind of play around with broad cadences. They all have a very narrow range of styles and skill sets, which is not a bad thing at all. It's kind of knowing where you fit in and channeling the best of that pocket. But it is a very, very limited pocket. And for Skwatta Kamp to try and do something outside of the range of that, it often becomes difficult to resonate because it feels very disingenuous to who they are. And I think this is why the latest project doesn't become the swan song that I think they would hope it could be, because it is them ruining their legacy, essentially, musically speaking, by going so far out of the style that was sculpted by the beat makers and the producers of that time, who were kind of really taking this soul and aggression and weaving it into drums which were harsh and banging, and the era of that time, to this kind of more open, sparse, auto-tune driven era. And I think what makes this project, through each and every song, it becomes tedious because, number one, they're not really rapping from a place that feels genuinely comfortable and fun anymore. A lot of the raps feel forced, a lot of the flows feel rigid. The chemistry isn't even there, and I think that's the secret element which makes this project fall apart. The fact that it is Skwatta Kamp without its two transitioned members who passed away, but it's also Skwatta Kamp without a member who's still alive but who didn't show up to the affair, and that's Infa. So I want to go into how the politics behind the music ruin the music in itself. I'm not going to go into the tabloid-esque issues that many of the members have had with each other over the years, but ultimately what I can say is that it culminates in the absence of one member, and you can feel the void, because as much as I tended to, I personally underestimated the value of Infa in the element of the dynamic, and now it's glaringly obvious how you can't have a Skwatta Kamp if Flaba's not present, if Infa's not present. So even though they kind of tried to group together a crew which could represent the legacy, it truly isn't Skwatta when the whole gang isn't present. And as a result, the chemistry that was probably due to Flaba and Infa being present is something that becomes so obvious to see, because it makes the rap feel a little jittery, forced, and to be honest with you, the entertaining element of Skwatta Kamp tended to be in how they fed off of each other. Flaba came in moments of tension that were brought about by an Amza or an Infa with their aggression, and he would come through with a little bit of humor to kind of dispel the energy and turn it around and possibly give it to Sugar Smacks. And now that that kind of really holistic setup isn't there, you can tell that they're an incomplete force. And this project, the rap in itself, feels massively incomplete. I think even now, really officializing and putting Relo into the center doesn't do enough to push and make the music sound natural in its chemistry. It does a lot to bridge the musicality forward, because Relo, being the talented vocalist she is, kind of sets the hooks up in ways which are listenable, but again, it feels like they were pandering to a younger audience instead of sticking to the esteem of being matured artists who excelled at a particular kind of sound. And as a result, there isn't a single memorable song on this. There isn't a single memorable verse on this. There isn't a chemistry on this that is able to linger beyond a listening. There isn't a cohesive sense of power which pulls this album together and brings it beyond any place which is terrible. And it saddens me to say this. It feels like when athletes push too far in their careers and they don't listen when people tell them now is the perfect time to retire, and they end up being so washed up and beat up that it taints all of the years of their establishment. It kind of feels like that. This album feels like a desperate attempt at consolidating issues outside of the music, and as a result it manifests itself in ways that are messy, and not messy in the avant-garde, eccentrically appealing kind of way. Messy in the I don't know what the fuck is going on kind of way. So ultimately, it's gonna have to be a 1 out of 10 for me. And this is, again, it's painful to say, but it's playing to something which is alienable from what Skwatta Kamp is. I was listening to this and it doesn't bring any sense of nostalgia to what made Skwatta great to begin with. It's too outside of their zone of comfort. It's too outside of their creative element. I'm all for growing, but know thyself. Know your strengths and play to them as you experiment outside of that, especially when you're seasoned and are competing in a space which tends to be dominated by younger people. And it feels like this need to try and be intergenerational and ever present to all groups of people failed Skwatta in a moment which really demanded one thing and one thing only of them: to tap into their greatest moments and to translate that into 2023. And I don't think they did it at all. I think they were playing so massively far from everything we've heard, from Moya to the clap song to every other moment we appreciated what Skwatta Kamp was about. So I think ultimately this is a very harsh example of how even established legendary artists can fool themselves into thinking that their years and their experience are enough to allow them to play into foreign fields of artistic expression. And I think if there's one thing that we've learned from the recent release of OG legendary artists putting out projects, whether internationally or in the continent, it's that it only ever works if you look at the essential formula that made it work to begin with. Skwatta has an audience which has evolved with it, and I think in this project they didn't cater to that. They didn't talk to the people who built this mammoth mythology of Skwatta Kamp to begin with. They were talking to a people who probably don't even want to listen to them, and as a result it just feels like a frustrating play that full-grown adults are doing at not understanding their own unique signature sound. For me, it's a no. And I want to say this in the most graceful possible kind of way. Please go back to Skwatta Kamp's catalog and teach yourself about why they were so important, why they laid the foundation for artists like an AKA and for artists, just virtually South African rap as it exists today. And if any Skwatta Kamp members are watching, sincerely tell me you think this wasn't you playing out of the quote-unquote zone of comfort, the zone of excellence. And if it isn't, holler at me on the comment section. We do this for the love. If you don't agree with this review, talk to me. We don't bring these out as absolute opinions. It's understanding the artist, their vision, and how that plays into market value, musical creativity, and assessing the all-round dynamics of the music. And I want to say, as a last note, the mixing here is pristine. You can hear them. It's probably one of the most polished Skwatta Kamp albums to date, but unfortunately it's done in a style which doesn't feel like Skwatta Kamp at all. I'm traumatized by this project, by this very, very, very bad project by a very, very good group. And I mean good in the sense of understanding themselves. A lot of purist hip-hop heads have always accused Skwatta Kamp of being whack. And as you famously know, the headspace doesn't believe in such a term. What we believe in is artists who master their own skill. And Skwatta Kamp has always been about energy. It's always been about relatability. And for those two key elements to not be present in this album really shows us that they probably don't understand why we really love them to begin with. And if they do, why did they ignore us? Why? Oh, why Skwatta